The plasma bolt screamed past Commander Lyralay's viewport, close enough that she could see the molecular disruption patterns dancing across the reinforced crystalline surface. 3 solar cycles of this madness, and her pointed ears still twitched involuntarily at each near miss. The silent claw shuddered as another wave of hive bioprojectiles hammered their deflector arrays, the ship's living metal hull rippling like disturbed water as it absorbed the kinetic energy. "Status report, Lieutenant Corrin," she called over the din of battle, her voice carrying the peculiar harmonic undertones that marked her as Zephyrian nobility. Her aide, a younger officer whose ears curved more dramatically than her own, looked up from his tactical display with that insufferable grin he wore during the worst moments of combat. "Well, Commander, the good news is we're not dead yet," Corrin announced cheerfully, his fingers dancing across holographic controls that flickered between amber and crimson warnings. "The bad news is that Squadron 7 just got turned into what our human allies would probably call space confetti." Lyralay's violet eyes narrowed as she watched the debris field that had moments ago been 12 of her finest fighters. The hive dreadnoughts moved through the wreckage like massive predatory insects, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with satisfied hunger. Each enemy vessel was a living nightmare of chitinous armor and organic weaponry, evolved over eons to be the perfect killing machine. "Your jokes are getting worse under pressure, Lieutenant," she observed dryly, though she appreciated his attempt to maintain morale. "What's the tactical situation?" "Spectacularly awful, ma'am. The Hive has deployed 47 capital ships, 236 fighter analogs, and what our xenobiologists insist on calling the big scary things with too many teeth. Our plasma cannons are barely scratching their adaptive bioarmor, and they've learned to counter our quantum torpedo targeting protocols." Corrin paused to duck as another enemy salvo lit up the bridge in unpleasant shades of green. "Oh, and our deflector efficiency is down to 32%. But hey, at least we're consistent in our failure." The bridge crew worked with the practiced efficiency of warriors who had learned to function in impossible circumstances. Holographic displays showed the 3-dimensional chess game of orbital combat, with Zephyrian vessels darting between the system's asteroid field, while Hive bioships pursued them with relentless hunger. The enemy moved like a coordinated organism, which of course they were. The Hive collective shared a psychic network that made their tactical coordination nearly flawless. "Commander," called sensor operator Tylene from her station near the rear of the bridge, "I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions at the system's edge. Something big is dropping out of hyperspace." Lyralay felt her stomach clench. More Hive reinforcements would end this battle decisively, and not in their favor. The Zephyrian fleet had been steadily worn down over the past 3 cycles, their advanced energy weapons proving inadequate against an enemy that could literally evolve countermeasures in real time. "How many ships?" she asked, already calculating retreat vectors in her mind. "Uncertain, ma'am. The signatures are odd. They're not using biodisplacement drives like the Hive, but they're also not using quantum tunneling like us." Tylene's brow furrowed in concentration, her pointed ears twitching as she parsed the sensor data. "The propulsion system appears to be chemical. That can't be right." "Chemical propulsion." Corrin laughed, the sound carrying a slightly hysterical edge. "What kind of civilization still uses controlled explosions to move through space? Did we accidentally stumble into a primitive system?" The answer came in the form of a transmission that made every piece of equipment on the bridge suddenly seem obsolete. The signal was crude electromagnetic radiation, the kind of communication system that most spacefaring species abandoned millennia ago in favor of quantum entanglement networks. Their universal translator hummed and whirred, clearly struggling with the primitive encoding. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Colonial Fleet," crackled a voice that seemed absurdly calm given the circumstances. "We're here to help." Lyralay stared at the communication panel as if it had suddenly sprouted tentacles. Terran, I've never heard of that species. Neither have I, Corin admitted, his usual joviality replaced by genuine curiosity. But they picked an interesting time to introduce themselves. The tactical display updated as the newcomers emerged from hyperspace, and Lyreley felt her breath catch in her throat. The ships were ugly. There was no other word for them. Where Zephyrian vessels flowed like liquid metal sculptures and hive bioships resembled living creatures. These human craft looked like someone had assembled them from geometric shapes and painted them in aggressive colors. They bristled with protrusions that could only be weapon emplacements, their hulls scarred and patched as if they'd seen extensive combat. "Ma'am," Tylene reported, "the new arrivals are broadcasting on multiple frequencies. They're singing." Indeed they were. Through the static of electromagnetic transmission came the unmistakable sound of voices raised in harmony, though the words were incomprehensible. It was hauntingly beautiful and completely inappropriate for a battlefield, which somehow made it more unsettling than the hive's psychic silence. "Put me through to this Admiral Chen," Lyreley ordered. She had no idea who these humans were or why they thought their primitive-looking fleet could make a difference, but desperate times called for desperate allies. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a face that was almost Zephyrian but subtly wrong. The human admiral had the same basic facial structure, the same expressive eyes, but her ears were disappointingly round and small. She wore a uniform that managed to look both practical and ceremonial, covered in patches and insignia that probably meant something to her species. "Commander Lyreley," Chen said with a slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "we've been monitoring your situation. The Hive Collective has made the mistake of expanding into territory we consider interesting. With respect, Admiral, your ships appear to be using technology that my people abandoned before we achieved interstellar flight. What exactly do you think you can accomplish here?" Chen's smile widened, and Lyreley suddenly realized it was the expression of a predator who had spotted wounded prey. "Commander, you're thinking like someone who's been fighting a fair war. We don't." Admiral Sarah Chen stood in the tactical center of the Indomitable Asterisk, watching her weapons officer explain the finer points of human warfare to a holographic projection of Commander Lyreley. The Zephyrians' pointed ears kept twitching, and what Chen had learned was their equivalent of raised eyebrows, particularly when Lieutenant Martinez enthusiastically described their Beethoven's Ninth Symphony missile pattern. "So let me understand this correctly," Lyreley said, her voice carrying that melodic quality that made every Zephyrian sound like they were perpetually on the verge of breaking into song. "You name your tactical formations after dead composers and musicians who consumed recreational pharmaceuticals. Only the really good ones," Martinez replied with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for discussing favorite recipes. "The Led Zeppelin formation is particularly effective against bioships because they don't expect the diagonal approach. Most species think in terms of orbital mechanics and energy efficiency. We think in terms of what would look really cool and how can we confuse the enemy into making stupid decisions." Chen watched the alien commander's expression cycle through several emotions that didn't translate well across species barriers. The Zephyrians had been fighting the Hive Collective for 3 solar cycles using conventional energy-based warfare, and it was clearly wearing them down. Their ships were marvels of engineering, all flowing lines and quantum harmonics, but they fought like civilized beings. Humans had learned long ago that civilization was a luxury that could be temporarily set aside when the situation demanded it. "Admiral Chen," Lyreley's image flickered slightly as another hive plasma burst interfered with their communication array. "My tactical officers are expressing concern about your weapon systems. Our sensors indicate you're using kinetic projectiles." "Guilty as charged," Chen admitted cheerfully. "Turns out that when you accelerate a chunk of dense metal to a significant fraction of light speed, It doesn't much care what kind of fancy energy shields you're hiding behind. Physics is remarkably egalitarian that way. The truth was more complex, of course. Humanity had developed energy weapons that could match anything the Zephyrians fielded, along with quantum manipulation technology that made their enemies' most advanced systems look like stone knives. But there was something deeply satisfying about watching an enemy's confusion when faced with what appeared to be primitive projectile weapons that somehow punched through their most sophisticated defenses. Captain Ramirez, Chen called to her tactical coordinator. What's our targeting solution on the Hive command cluster? Locked and loaded, Admiral. The Mjolnir-class railguns are charged and ready. Target package includes 12 dreadnoughts and approximately 40 escort vessels. Estimated time to impact, 37 seconds. Lyralay's hologram leaned forward with obvious interest. Mjolnir. Is that another one of your musical references? Norse mythology, actually, Chen explained. Mjolnir was the hammer of Thor, god of thunder. We have a somewhat eclectic approach to nomenclature. She paused as her communications officer held up a hand. What is it, Lieutenant Tors? Ma'am, we're intercepting Hive psychic chatter. Our xenopsychology AI is translating their collective thoughts, and Tors paused, apparently consulting her displays. Well, ma'am, they seem to be experiencing what the computer is interpreting as existential confusion mixed with predatory anticipation, and something the translator is rendering as cosmic constipation. Cosmic constipation. Chen raised an eyebrow. That's a new one. The AI admits it's struggling with the concept, ma'am. Apparently the Hive has never encountered a species that approaches warfare with what they're calling aggressive whimsy. Chen nodded thoughtfully. The Hive Collective was a fascinating enemy from a tactical perspective. They shared a psychic network that made them incredibly coordinated, but it also meant they experienced collective emotions. And right now, that collective was trying to process the cognitive dissonance of facing opponents, who seemed to treat life-or-death combat as some kind of elaborate performance art. Admiral, Lyralay interrupted, my sensors are detecting massive energy buildups in your forward weapons arrays. What exactly are you planning to do? Something that's going to be either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, Chen replied honestly. In human military doctrine, those are often the same thing. The bridge of the asterisk Indomitable hummed with controlled energy as the railgun capacitors reached full charge. Unlike the elegant energy weapons favored by most spacefaring civilizations, human kinetic weapons were brutally straightforward. They took a projectile, accelerated it to ridiculous velocities, and let physics handle the rest. The projectiles themselves were works of art, dense core penetrators wrapped in sensor packages and guidance systems that could adjust their trajectory even at near-light speeds. Firing solution confirmed, Ramirez announced. All ships report ready. Music selection for this engagement is, let me see, Bach's Brandenburg Concerto No. 3 with optional Wagner for the finale. Excellent choice, Chen approved. Nothing said. The Hive command node pulsed with bioluminescent distress patterns as Overmind Prime attempted to process the unprecedented situation. For the first time in its billion-year existence, the collective was experiencing something its vast neural networks could only classify as profound bewilderment. The human vessels continued their assault with what appeared to be organized chaos, their tactical movements following no recognizable pattern except pure aggressive unpredictability. Entity Admiral Chen, the Overmind broadcast through quantum psychic channels, its mental voice carrying undertones of cosmic exasperation. Your species' combat methodology defies fundamental principles of strategic logic. Our adaptive algorithms cannot formulate countermeasures against opponents who appear to be conducting warfare as recreational activity. Admiral Chen's response came through their translation matrix with what sounded suspiciously like barely contained laughter. Overmind Prime, you're thinking about this all wrong. War isn't supposed to be logical. If it were logical, we'd just send computers to fight each other and go home to have dinner with our families. From her position on the bridge of the Silent Claw, Commander Lyreley watched this impossible conversation unfold, while her tactical displays painted increasingly surreal pictures of the battle. Human vessels were performing maneuvers that violated every principle of space combat she had learned at the Zephyrian War College. One frigate had just executed what her computer insisted on calling a barrel roll, while firing kinetic rounds that somehow curved around asteroids to hit targets on the far side of the debris field. Lieutenant Corrin, she called to her aide, who was currently trying to reconcile sensor readings that suggested human weapons were improving their accuracy when damaged. "Are you monitoring the human communications channels?" "Oh yes, ma'am," Corrin replied, his pointed ears practically vibrating with suppressed mirth. "They're fascinating. Apparently, they've designated this entire engagement as something called Operation Pineapple Express, and they're keeping score. Individual score, team score, and something they're calling style points for creative targeting solutions." Lyreley felt her head, beginning to ache in the way that suggested reality was becoming unnecessarily complicated. Style points. Captain Rodriguez of the Defiant just earned 50 points for what his crew is calling a trick shot. He bounced a railgun round off 3 different asteroids to hit a Hive biocruiser that thought it was safely hidden. His gunner is apparently demanding extra shore leave for exceptional artistic merit. The tactical situation continued to deteriorate for the Hive in ways that defied conventional military analysis. Human ships were broadcasting everything from classical symphonies to something their cultural database identified as death metal during combat operations. The psychological effect on the collective was immediate and devastating. A species that shared all thoughts and emotions was completely unprepared for opponents who treated existential combat as entertainment. "Admiral Chen," Lyreley opened a channel to the human commander, "my sensors are detecting some unusual activity from your fleet. Are your ships damaged?" "Define damaged," Chen replied cheerfully. "The Valkyrie just lost her port engine cluster, but Captain Martinez says it's actually improved her turning radius. The asterisk Thor's hammer asterisk took a plasma hit to her forward armor, but the crew has turned the hull breach into an impromptu weapons port. And the Loki asterisk. Well, let's just say that Captain Thompson has always been creative with damage control procedures. Your crews are celebrating battle damage." "Commander, you have to understand something about human psychology. We're the only species we know of that actually finds warfare genuinely entertaining rather than just necessary. My tactical officer just proposed a betting pool on which ship can achieve the most improbable targeting solution. The current favorite is the asterisk Einstein asterisk, whose crew wants to calculate a trajectory that uses a gas giant's gravity well to deliver kinetic rounds in a spiral pattern." Lyreley watched her displays update with increasingly impossible human maneuvers. The fleet was operating like a pack of predators who had discovered that their prey was not only edible, but also provided excellent sport. Ships were performing coordinated attacks that looked more like elaborate dances than military operations, and their communications channels were filled with commentary that treated the life-and-death struggle as some kind of competitive event. "Sensor Operator Tylene," Lyreley called. "What's the status of the Hive formations?" "They're retreating, ma'am. Not withdrawing tactically, actually retreating. Their bioships are exhibiting what our xenobiological computers are classifying as collective anxiety disorder. Several command nodes have stopped responding to psychic coordination entirely, and we're detecting massive fluctuations in their neural network coherence." The truth was even stranger than Tylene's report suggested. The Hive Collective, which had conquered star systems through pure tactical superiority and adaptive evolution, was experiencing something unprecedented in its existence. They were being psychologically overwhelmed by opponents who treated their ultimate weapons as interesting toys. "Ma'am," Corin interrupted, "I'm monitoring a fascinating exchange between the human ship Mjolnir and one of their escort vessels. Apparently, Captain Williams has just been challenged to what they're calling a competition by the crew of the Gungnir. They want to see who can achieve the most creative destruction of hive bioarmor using what they term artistic kinetic solutions. And Admiral Chen is permitting this. She's judging the competition, ma'am. She just awarded the Gungnir extra points for what she called innovative use of rotational mechanics after they spun their ship while firing to create a spiral pattern of kinetic impacts." Lyreley realized that she was witnessing something that would require entirely new categories in military tactical manuals. The humans weren't just winning the battle, they were redefining what warfare meant. Their approach was so fundamentally alien to conventional military thinking that their enemies literally couldn't process it. "Commander Lyreley," Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communication channel, "we're about to demonstrate what we call the finale. You might want to record this for your tactical archives. We don't get to use this particular strategy very often. What exactly are you planning, Admiral? Something that's either going to be remembered as a brilliant tactical innovation or the stupidest thing ever attempted in space combat. In human military tradition, those are often the same thing." The human fleet suddenly shifted formation, their ships spreading out in what looked like a completely random pattern. But as Lyreley watched, she began to see the underlying structure. They were positioning themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that would turn the entire asteroid field into a kinetic weapon delivery system. "All ships, this is Admiral Chen," came the broadcast on all human frequencies. "Operation Pineapple Express is entering final phase. Music selection for the grand finale is Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries, followed by the William Tell Overture for the closing sequence. Remember, people, this is being recorded for the archives. Make it count." The Hive Collective's final transmission was a psychic shriek of pure confusion that their translation systems rendered as, "This species treats organized destruction as performance art. How do we counter opponents who consider warfare an aesthetic experience?" Admiral Chen's response was broadcast simultaneously on electromagnetic, quantum, and psychic frequencies. "You don't counter us over Mind Prime. You either surrender, retreat, or provide us with more interesting tactical challenges. Personally, I'm hoping you choose option 3. It's been a while since we've had opponents who made us work for our victories." The silence that followed the Hive Collective's retreat was broken only by the gentle hum of the * Silent Claws * life support systems, and what sounded suspiciously like someone singing off-key in the human communication channels. Commander Lyreley stood before her tactical displays, watching the last of the bioships disappear into hyperspace, with a velocity that suggested they had no intention of returning anytime soon. "Well," Lieutenant Corin observed cheerfully, "that's the first time I've seen an enemy fleet retreat while broadcasting what our translators are calling apologetic confusion and respectful terror." Admiral Chen's image appeared on the main view screen, her expression combining satisfaction with what Lyreley was learning to recognize as distinctly human amusement. Behind the Admiral, her bridge crew was engaged in what appeared to be some kind of celebratory ritual involving beverages and rhythmic chanting. "Commander Lyreley," Chen said with a grin that revealed slightly pointed teeth, "I believe we need to have a more detailed conversation. Would you be willing to come aboard the Indomitable? I think you'll find our hospitality educational." 30 minutes later, Lyreley found herself in the human flagship's conference room, surrounded by officers whose approach to post-battle analysis involved what they called after-action refreshments and detailed discussions of who had achieved the most creative targeting solutions. The room itself was a fascinating study in human psychology, walls covered with charts, battle honors, and what appeared to be humorous sayings in multiple languages. "So," Chen began, settling into a chair that looked like it had seen extensive use, "let me answer the question you've been too polite to ask directly. We weren't just passing through this system, Commander. We've been tracking the Hive Collective for the better part of 3 years." Lyralay's pointed ears twitched with surprise. 3 years, but they only entered this sector 8 months ago. "They made a mistake," Captain Rodriguez explained, his expression suddenly losing all traces of the humor that had characterized the battle. 6 months before they showed up here, they attacked a human agricultural colony called New Tuscany. Small place, only about 50,000 people. They thought it was an easy target. "The collective consumed the entire population," Captain Martinez added quietly. "Every man, woman, and child. They turned our people into biomass for their war machine." Chen leaned forward, her casual demeanor shifting into something that made Lyralay suddenly understand why the Hive had been so eager to retreat. "Commander, what you witnessed today wasn't our military responding to a random encounter. This was a hunting expedition. We've been following their trail across 3 star systems, waiting for the right moment to introduce ourselves properly. But your ships, your weapons, they appear so primitive compared to our technology." "Appear" being the operative word, Lieutenant Torres interjected with a grin. "Ma'am, with respect, your energy weapons are beautiful and efficient, but they're also predictable. Every spacefaring civilization develops plasma cannons and quantum torpedoes. We decided to take a different approach." Chen activated a holographic display that showed technical specifications that made Lyralay's engineering background rebel against reality. "Our kinetic weapons aren't primitive, Commander. They're deliberately archaic-looking. But the railguns that just shredded a Hive dreadnought squadron are powered by antimatter containment systems and guided by quantum processing arrays that make your ship's computers look like pocket calculators." "You've been deliberately appearing less advanced than you actually are." "Psychological warfare," Captain Thompson confirmed. "Nothing makes an enemy more careless than thinking they're facing inferior technology. The Hive spent 3 solar cycles learning to counter Zephyrian energy weapons. They never bothered developing defenses against what they assumed was primitive kinetic artillery." Lyralay felt her worldview reorganizing itself around several uncomfortable realizations. How advanced is human technology actually? "Let me put it this way," Chen replied with a smile that was probably meant to be reassuring but somehow wasn't. "This entire engagement was what we call a reconnaissance in force. The ships you saw today represent about 12% of our total military capability, and they're all from our colonial fleet, which is basically our frontier exploration and light combat force." "Light combat, Commander," Captain Rodriguez said gently. "The real military is currently 3 systems away constructing what we're calling a proper welcome party for the Hive. 12 dreadnought battle groups, 47 destroyer squadrons, and a mobile construction fleet that's building custom kinetic weapons specifically designed to counter bioadaptive armor." The conference room fell silent as Lyralay processed the implications. The force that had just terrified the Hive Collective into retreat was essentially a scouting party. The humans had been tracking their enemies across